have to admit, when I first read it, I was kind of like, this is kind of boring. But then as it was almost too simple, but then as I studied it, I loved it. And I do love it. So he focuses on two elements of the restored gospel. The first element is on all of our divinely appointed responsibilities. Kind of sounds heavy, right? It's like, oh, great, what responsibilities do I have? But then the second one is that the gospel is plain, precious, and simple. And so let's talk about the first element first, our divinely appointed responsibilities. And they are explained in the general handbook. And he even said, like, when you hear that word general handbook, it often makes us want to shudder. Like, oh, great. I remember when you'd get certain callings, they'd be like, and here's your handbook. Now they don't even have it printed. It's all online. And they updated it and made changes to it starting in, like, what was it, February of 2020, a couple of years ago. And this part of divinely appointed responsibilities was one of the changes that was made because it wasn't part of the original handbook or the one that they changed. It's all in chapter 1, and chapter 1 is brand new for the general handbook. And so it says in chapter 1 of the general handbook, it says, as we come unto Christ and help others do the same, we participate in God's work of salvation and exaltation. This work is guided by the two great commandments to love God and to love our neighbors. The work of salvation and exaltation focuses on 4 divinely appointed responsibilities. So these are them. So it's living the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm actually going to write them because we're going to compare them to something. So that's awful. Living the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm really glad we don't have these at school. Okay. Living the gospel of Jesus Christ, caring for those in need. And then inviting all to receive the gospel. And then the last one is uniting families for eternity. And I found these, I found it interesting because I listened to a podcast about this talk, and they were saying that basically these 4 divinely appointed responsibilities, they replaced what we grew up learning about, the threefold mission of the church, which I think we could all, can you guys read was you mean perfect the saints and proclaim the gospel and redeem the dead. And I found that interesting because I think we can all agree, I grew up just it was those 3 things, we had perfect the saints, proclaim the gospel, redeem the dead. And this obviously encompasses those same ideas, but the wording is so different. What are your thoughts? When I hear perfect the saints, I can get a little well, that's heavy. Are we going to become perfect? Not in this life. So I think if you're to say perfect the saints, maybe we could put those 2, as living the gospel of Jesus Christ, caring for those in need. Yeah, Bridget.
I feel like the difference between these and the others is the others seem to be focused on the end result, and this seems to be more focused on sort of daily tasks that we do along the path
to get there.
To get there.
I like that. I didn't think about it like that. I really like that. And then maybe like this would be proclaim the gospel, inviting all to receive it, and redeem the dead, uniting families for eternity. Yeah, and I feel like this is like it feels a lot more approachable, not so like overwhelming and heavy. So I think it's awesome that they have made these changes, and I'm 2 years behind because they made the changes 2 years ago, and I'm like, oh, it's taking place of that threefold mission idea. The other part, we'll talk about these divinely appointed responsibilities a little bit further, but the second element that Elder Stevenson talked about was that the gospel is plain, precious, and simple. And he said that these 4 things are like a roadmap to be able to return back to our Heavenly Father, but to not make these 4 things more complicated than they actually are. They're simple, and we need to keep them simple. I also like, though, that instead of like perfect the saints, I like the wording of living the gospel of Jesus Christ, because as we all know, it's not just enough to like show up to church, show up to the classes, and know the gospel, like the information in the gospel, but it's applying it and like living it and putting it into practice. The second element that this is plain, precious, and simple, it says, it has been said that the gospel of Jesus Christ is simply beautiful and beautifully simple. The world is not. It is complicated, complex, and filled with turmoil and strife. We are blessed as we exercise care not to allow complexity so common in the world to enter into the way we receive and practice the gospel. President Dallin H. Oaks observed, we are taught many small and simple things in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We need to be reminded that in total and over a significant period of time, those seemingly small things bring to pass great things. Jesus Christ himself describes that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. We should all strive to keep the gospel simple in our lives, in our families, in our classes and quorums, and in our wards and states. So I like, though, that it kind of takes off that like overwhelming, heavy feeling that it's simple, but you need to be consistent with it. Elder Stevenson went on to share some stories that modeled each of these 4 things. And I kind of went back and forth. The stories are pretty short, and we can share the stories, and maybe that will give people ideas of things they want to share. Or if anyone has anything they want to share before the stories, I would love to hear from everybody. I'm just going to read from our handbook, just the short description it has for each of these. And if you have any ideas, please, or thoughts or anything, experiences, let me know.
Christine?
Yeah.
You were talking about the language, how you like the way that it's worded. I also like the way that it's worded because if we think of the ones before the threefold mission, it's pretty compartmentalized, like us and them, like we the saints, people who aren't, people who are passed on. These like unite us as we're all in the same group. There isn't like boundaries as much. And I really like that.
I do too. And especially like inviting all to receive the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And whether like you're inviting them to be baptized someday, or just inviting them to like experience and see and share the light of Christ.
Right, and it's also like inviting one another to live, like we can also invite each other in the like,
that are fellow saints.
Exactly.
So, that are along the path to keep.
And also with the Uniting Families for Eternity, that's like, it's different than us saving our dead. Like, there's more of a continuum, and they help us and we help them. It's
No, and I do like it because I feel like it includes with the Uniting Family. It's like helping us with our families right now to stay together, and supporting each other and those, not just after this life.
Yeah,
I mean that's part of it, but it's not all of it. Yeah, I like that a lot. I like the change a lot. For living the gospel of Jesus Christ, it says there's 3 bullets: exercising faith in Christ, repenting daily, making covenants with God as we receive the ordinances of salvation and exaltation, and enduring to the end by keeping those covenants. That was 1 bullet. And then the other one is learning and teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ at home and at church. And then the 3rd bullet is becoming self-reliant and providing for ourselves and our families, both spiritually and temporally. It's pretty simple. So the story that Elder Stevenson shared is about this man named Jens, and he lived in Denmark. And it was in the summer, and apparently in Denmark, it's kind of like Alaska, where you have like many hours of light during the summer. And anyway, Jens of Denmark, he starts off by saying that he prays daily to live the gospel and notice promptings from the Holy Ghost. And so it starts off that he says, we live in this small home with a thatched roof in the center of a cozy little village close to a village pond. And one night, on the most beautiful Danish summer weather imaginable, doors and windows were open. I'm sure it was still light because it was dinner time. And he said, due to our gloriously bright and long summer nights, I had not been in a hurry to replace a burned out light bulb in our utility room. And suddenly I got a strong feeling to replace it immediately. And at the same time, he heard his wife say that it was time for dinner, go wash up. And he goes, I had a strong feeling that I needed to do it right now. And I mean, and you can imagine, because I could imagine if I was like, dinner, and he's like, sorry, I gotta run to the store to go get a light bulb. I'd be like, what? After dinner. But anyway, he left immediately. He said the store was on the other side of the pond. And so he says, we usually walked, but to hurry up, he jumped on his bike to go get this light bulb. And while he was riding past the pond, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a small boy, about 2 years old, walking along and very close to the water, and suddenly fell in, and nobody else was around. And he said 1 minute he was there, and the next minute he was gone. And so he threw his bike on the ground. He ran over. He was waist high in the pond. And he said there was duckweed all over, making it impossible to see through the water. And he sensed some movement to the side. So he reached his hand in, grabbed a hold of a t-shirt of the boy, pulled him up. He started gasping, coughing, and crying, but he was reunited with his family. And so he says, this happened because he prays every morning to help him recognize promptings from the Holy Ghost. And so that this was the Elder Stevenson's example of living the gospel by seeking divine revelation each day and striving to be worthy and doing his best to follow that direction when it comes. So does anyone have any thoughts or experiences about living the gospel before we go on to the second one?
So I'm not great at all the asking for divine inspiration daily, but it just, when I was listening to this story, it reminded me when my kids were little and they had rooms in the basement, and one night I was like, open all the windows downstairs. And that's not something I would normally do because I kind of wanted to lock them in safe. They were already in bed, but I went back and I opened all their windows, and it wasn't even really a super
strong prompting. It was just
it was like
something you didn't usually do.
Yeah, no, that's just not, and it wasn't even really great for the weather, but I did it anyway. Well, turns out we had a huge gas leak that was in the utility room, which was next to their bedrooms, and the house was kind of filled with gas, but it had dissipated enough. It was just the dryer, but it would have been enough. I don't know what would have happened or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I just know very specifically that I had to open the windows. And so even just little things like that, you know, dramatic or not.
Well, it's
grateful
kind of
that I
like
was-
Tate said in his talk that some of those things, was it Tate, or that he notices that some of those promptings come like later when he looks back, that like, oh, that was a prompting.
Yeah, totally. Like I didn't go, something's going to happen because I opened my windows. You know, it kind of dawned on me there. I'm like, oh my gosh, I opened the windows last night. Oh my gosh, we have a gas leak today. Oh,
Yeah.
you know? So anyway, there are those moments where it's good to pay attention.
Yeah, Bridget.
Well, it just made me think, I was listening to a podcast this week and there was an interview with Elder Bednar, and he was talking about how if you're striving every day to live the gospel of Jesus Christ and to be a little bit better today than you were yesterday, you know, and just doing those simple little things, he said, you know, you're promised that you will always have the Spirit to be with you. And so he's like, so often we think that there are these huge moments, right, of inspiration where, you know, where we need to see an angel or we need to have that, you know, burning sensation that some people experience. But he's like, if you're doing what's right and striving to do what's right every day, then you don't need to ask yourself whether or not it's a prompting from you or if it's a prompting from the Spirit, because you've got the Spirit with you all the time, guiding you along the way. And so that just made me think of that, like those simple little things are available to us all day, every day, because we have the Spirit with us.
And it usually is simple. And that's what this whole talk about. Like, this is simple. Let's not try to make it into something more complicated.
Right. And that was his point, is that he was kind of talking about personal revelation and knowing whether or not we're receiving it. And he's like, you're always receiving it if you're striving to do what's right. You know, like it's that simple. It's not huge. It's in the small, simple things. So I think that's a perfect example of how.
And I think oftentimes we do get promptings and we don't know why. Like obviously, like we don't know why. It seems weird sometimes, or just out of character, like not something we usually do, but oh well, I'll do it, you know. And we don't know who we're gonna bless or how things will turn out, but you know, it's just kind of just kind of becoming like normal. You don't even really think about it. So yeah, right.
I feel like on the other hand too, like when other people are living the gospel, it helps bless my life. Like when I see like my roommates living the gospel and they're like, hey, let's all read our scriptures tonight. Like just like that simple act is like just brings us all closer together and like helps us all like rely on each other more and like have a connection. And so I feel like by others living the gospel, like it also blesses so many other people too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, the second one, caring for those in need. In the handbook, it says the 3 bullets for caring for those in need are serving and ministering to individuals, families, and communities, sharing resources, including church assistance with those in need, and then helping others become self-reliant. So before I read his story, or we talk about his story, I think service is actually like one of the most like magical things there is. About a month ago, Cole got in trouble because his grades had dropped, and we had like told him like, you have a week to talk to your teachers and get this particular grade figured out, or there will be consequences. And the week came and gone, and the grade was just as bad still. And so we said, fine. He's like, passion is bowling. He loves bowling. And we said, you can't go bowling this weekend. And which, like to anyone else, is like, oh, okay. We didn't take away his phone. We didn't like ground him. We just said, you can't go bowling this weekend. We told you, we mean it. You can't go bowling this weekend. We didn't even say you couldn't hang out with his friends. You just can't go bowling this weekend. And he was so mad at us, like wouldn't even talk to us, wouldn't even like look at us, and just like, you know, and then that starts to like make everyone grumpy because he's just mad and angry. And so this is like Friday evening, And then Jack is getting irritable because his older brother he shares a room with is just mad at the world because he can't go bowling. And and anyway, and this was just a month ago, so it was like end of February, and my mother still hadn't taken down Christmas. And everyone dreads taking down Christmas at her house because there's a lot and it's very unorganized and very messy and lots of dog hair everywhere. And, so everyone kind of like, as the kids, we're all kind of like, okay, you're it this year. You're it. Okay. So it was one of those that I was like, hey, Christmas is still up. We got to get Christmas down. So I said to the boys, I go, hey, you need to come help me. You guys got to help me come take down Christmas at Grandma's. And they know exactly what that means. And so we all go, and Cole's still not talking to me the whole way there, just mad. And we take Christmas down, and we're trying to vacuum, and the vacuum's covered and filled with dog hair, and we're just like, we're trying, like we get through it. And it takes us a few hours, and we get through Christmas, we get Christmas down. And it was like getting back in the car, it was like they were so happy. And it was one of those that I was just like, it really like reset their like whole perspective. And I was like, it really is like magical. Like, we didn't want to go. None of us had wanted to go. But it really did like totally reset them, make them appreciate things, make them appreciate our home and everything like that. And everyone was happy after. Like it was just, and we all took a shower and de-haired, and we bring like lint rollers, and no one's allowed back in the car anyway. But I think it's just one of those that like obviously we would have helped her and everything, but when you see the blessings of what service can do and how much it can impact somebody's life, that it just makes you realize like how amazing it is, because it's not just the person you're giving service to and whose life it really improves. Even my boys who they pretty much have everything they need and, want almost. And besides when they can't go bowling that weekend, but it really does reset them. The example that Elder Stevenson gave was that there was 3 teenagers in Colombia who were living together because their father had just recently passed away and their mother had passed away a year before. And so they were left alone in this small, humble shelter. And the walls were made of crude wood lined with plastic bags, and a tin roof covered only the areas where they slept. So, you can think of this is the most humble circumstances you could probably imagine that you wouldn't find in the United States. And so the stake president had visited them, and then they obviously knew they needed to help. And so they had sent lots of different groups, like through the ward council and stake leaders, Relief Society, elders, quorum, young men, young women. And they helped them fix up their house so that they had a better house to be able to live in that provided a shelter. And it just said these orphan children felt warm and reassuring bonds of their ward family to know that they are not alone and that God is always there for them. I found it interesting that Elder Stevenson chose this story for service. Because I don't know, to me, when I kind of read that, I'm like, well, duh, they need help. They don't have their parents. Come on, let's just help them, And I know it's different because they're in a different country where that probably is more of the norm. But I guess, the thing that I take away is just that the people that are receiving the service, that they felt the love of God through other people. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Reagan?
When I was reading it, I thought that the part that I thought was cool is that different, like some people helped design and others donated their labor and others made meals and like others donated materials, and each person used their own talents to help these girls. And it wasn't like one person was just building the whole thing. They like each used their individual talents to help serve these people.
Yeah, I like that. That we all have something to offer, whether we know how to build a house or not. I like that perspective. Thank you. Yeah.
And I also like, I mean, that was local to that area, right? And so often I think we can give service in large ways. And I really enjoyed Matt's talk today and some of the things that the countries and people surrounding Ukraine are doing, like simple things like thinking about how many people could they take. You know, like we can take one mother, one child. That's what they can do. They're not saying, well, maybe we could stuff 20 people in here, and you know, but they're thinking about what is it that they can offer, and then they're offering that, right? And having a strange person in your home, I'm sure, is not super convenient, even though you really want to do something good, right?
Yeah.
It still comes with sacrifice, right? And so I've alluded to this or talked about this before, but I heard a talk once, and it was talking about Jesus and about the geographic area that his life covered and how small that is when you consider his global impact, right? But he was in his own towns and in his own villages, right? He wasn't traveling at the, during his lifetime. He wasn't going around the world, right? He wasn't in Rome. He wasn't, in Greece or Italy or, he was right there in the heart of the area where he was born. And so it's always kind of given me perspective and about doing what we can in our community, and that is valuable, and that there is really that kind of ripple effect. Because like Reagan was saying, it's like, well, I have no idea how to build a house.
Yeah.
Like that's not.
But I can bring everyone lunch.
I'm
while
like,
they're
but I
building.
can tell me where to dig. You know what I'm saying? If somebody knows the plan, well, I can help follow the plan, or offer up what you can.
And you don't have to offer up everything.
No,
that you
it's not
have.
all on you, right?
Yeah.
It was a combined group, and so just I think again, I like to overcomplicate things. I don't know why, but it's one of my great talents.
But it is simple.
But it is simple. And I think that goes along with what Brother Stevenson is saying, that like there is beauty in the simplicity. And if we can stay simple and think of the simple things we can do and not get caught up in feeling like we have to do something really monumentous and grand, like we still can have an amazing impact.
Yeah, and it's like Dallin H. Oaks had said that over a lifetime. He said that over a significant period of time, those seemingly small things bring to pass great things. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Okay, number 3, inviting all to receive the gospel. So in the handbook, this one only has 2 bullets actually. And it says participating in missionary work and serving as missionaries, and then helping new and returning church members progress along the covenant path. And if I were in charge of the handbook, which I'm not, and I know that this is divine inspiration, but I think with new and returning, I think all of us helping all saints, everybody, that we come in contact with, progress along the path. And it's like we mentioned before, it doesn't mean necessarily that the end result's going to be a baptism. And if it is, that's great. But if it's just sharing the light of Christ and the light of the gospel and the goodness of the gospel with them, I think, that's great. Let's see. His story was about a 17-year-old boy in Cape Verde. His name was Clayton, if that's how you say it correctly. And he and his mother and older brother had been baptized into the church sometime earlier, but they just stopped attending. And he decided to go to seminary. And when he went to seminary, the other youth in his seminary class, they were warm and welcoming. They made him feel at home. They encouraged him to attend another activity, and he did so, and he just felt very included. And he started going to his church meetings soon after that. And a wise bishop saw spiritual potential in Clayton and invited him to be his assistant. And from that moment on, Clayton became an example and an influence to other young people. So the first person he invited back was his mother, and then his older brother. And then he started widening it to the circle of his friends. And one of those friends was a young boy it was his own age, 17. And he had met with the missionaries and wanted to be baptized. And so it really helped. Clayton really helped this other young boy come and along the path. But it says Clayton's efforts didn't stop there. He helped other less active members return, in addition to sharing the gospel with his friends of other faiths. And so it says today the ward has 35 active youth with a thriving seminary program, thanks in large part to Clayton's efforts of love, share, and invite. And now Clayton and his older brother are both preparing to serve full-time missions. So I think I like this story because it was just really simple. It was just, he showed up to seminary and he was included. He felt welcome and he was invited. And sometimes the end result doesn't end like that for making people feel welcome, but it's a place to start. Anybody have any thoughts or anything that stood out to them? It kind of goes along with what Reagan said, that, you know, when you see other people living the gospel like around you, it's like becomes kind of contagious. Like, hey, let's read our scriptures. Hey, let's do this. Or, yeah, Rochelle.
On our street, the Beasleys and I, as are the only ones that are LDS on the street. And a couple of, well, I guess it was last fall, two of the neighbors across the street got into practically a full-on brawl. They were yelling at each other, cussing. And Carl and I we were walking down the street, and we kind of looked and thought, wow, this is interesting.
Intense.
There's a lot of stuff going on. And it was two men, and they were next door neighbors, and I had no idea there was such contention amongst them. So we kind of passed. One of them we talked to a lot, and the other one is practically a hermit. We hardly ever see him. So we just said, is everything okay? And they're like, everything's fine. So we kept walking, and it was interesting that both of those men came to our door separately. The one that we talked to all the time, he's younger, and he came over and he said, I'm so sorry, this is what's happening. This is what's been going on for the last year, and blah, blah, blah. And he's complaining. He goes, but you didn't deserve that. Look, we're like,
Hey, we're good.
You're okay. Yeah, I hope you're okay. And I'm sorry, something must be going on in Ben's life. Well, then the guy that we never see came to my house, which has never happened. We've never really chatted except for waved. And he said, you guys seem like really good people. I've watched you guys. You didn't deserve to see all of that. And I'm like, what in the what? I said, I called Carl immediately. I'm like, you would not believe the apology I just got and why I got the apology. And then not just 3 weeks ago, a neighbor on the corner, also, I just teach their little kids piano, and he came over to me and he said, you know, I really love seeing you guys go to church every week. So do you guys have, like, do you believe like your prophet? And I said, I do. And he said, like, you know what's coming up, right? Like what's going on in the world. And I sat there and I said, I don't really know exactly what's going on in the world, but he does give me a lot of peace. And I just shared, like, he goes, I read Nostradamus the other day, and he was saying this and this. And I said, yeah, he has a weird amount of accuracy. And I said, but I can tell you a couple of times in my adult life where I
the prophet who said something and 20 years later or 10 years later. And he goes, that's amazing. He goes, just keep me posted, will you? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool though. That's you're approachable.
Super, you know? And then the guy on the corner,
He's like, just keep me posted of what I need to be doing.
yeah, you know, and it's just like,
Yeah.
But it's been very interesting. A guy down the street, my boys have mowed their lawn maybe twice, 5, 10 years ago, I don't know. And I also teach his boys piano. He came down to me, and I think he's pretty well known in the neighborhood. He's a gym teacher at Hillside. And he came down and asked me what it was that I did to raise my boys. He said, you have really excellent boys. I want my boys to be like your boys. And I just said, I don't know. I mean, it's a crapshoot, I think.
No, it is. We all just.
It just is sometimes. And I says, but I know it's helped our religion. And he goes, really? And then we kind of went through the whole, and I have been not super outward about how I live the gospel, but I do live the gospel, and I do go to church, and Carl and I walk, and they see us, and sometimes they'll say on our way home, what was the good word today? And we stop and we say, love your neighbors, we love you guys, and you know,
Yeah.
but I think that when we invite people to receive the gospel, I think we do it every day. We can do it every day just by trying really hard to be good neighbors, showing up when we need to show up, supporting when we need to support. And I am shocked to see who's watching us.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
who is watching us. You guys seem like good neighbors. You didn't deserve that. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, how have we have hardly even spoken. And
Yeah.
it was just a remarkable amount of surprise on my side that even somebody's watching, but I think they do.
I think I agree. And I love that you brought that up. I had a similar experience in my job, and working for a public school. I have to be very, very careful because especially within my students, I really try to not like say anything because I don't want to bring that into the classroom. But even among the faculty, you know, it's just, and I think it was the second year I was there, one of the teachers I teach with, we had become good friends, like just at school, like we would talk. Our families are kind of similar. They both own companies and they're kind of in the construction industry. And she came in and she's like, okay, I lived in Utah my entire life. And obviously I'm not LDS. And I've never known anyone who I could ask these questions. So I have a whole list of them. So first of all, number one, like, and it was just these like, and she's like, is it okay if I ask these? I'm like, shoot, like, yeah. And it was like, so what's this I hear about garments? You know, so we just kind of talked about it. And she's like, oh, that sounds odd, you know, like, and then it's like, what about this? And what about this? And I kind of laughed though, but I was like, how sad is it that she has lived here her whole life? She's my age. And she hasn't had somebody that felt comfortable enough and approachable enough to say like, hey, have some questions, you know? And after that she was like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand that a lot more. Oh, okay, you know, but I think, yeah, just by living it and being approachable, you know, that I think it goes a long way. Because it needs to be on their timing, anything, and, you know, and just being able to share that light of the gospel and the light of Christ
And
is.
sometimes it's the only thing you can do. I mean, we had neighbors that moved in from the Midwest, and they stopped in front of my window one summer. They were brand new. They stopped our other neighbors who knew us and said, all right, we're from the Midwest. And I'm
Like, do they really
and
have
I'm
horns?
like, the Mormon is here. And they said, well, what do you mean? Like, I mean, are they just trying to shove their church down your throat all the time? And he said, actually, there's only 2 Mormons on our block at this house,
Yeah.
this house. And they've been really good. I mean, no, they're not shoving it down, you know? And I thought, oh my gosh, that made me really think, like, that is the only thing I can do is just live my
Yeah.
religion. I can't even really share it unless asked to share it, right? Because I don't want to be that weird Mormon on the street that's like, how are the Mormons? What? I'm super nice, actually. I'm not gonna bring you a casserole. You know? But also,
Maybe cookies, though.
David, on his mission, when he was in Russia, he would have these recurring dreams that he was failing and that they were gonna send him home. He was a crap missionary. That's what his dreams were saying. You were just a crap missionary, go home. And he would have these reoccurring nightmares because the work was so hard. And he fasted and he prayed. And he said, David, your mission is just to introduce people to the light of Christ. It's been gone for a long time here. So once his idea of what his mission was going to be, it changed him completely. It just changed him. Every time he was on the street, when he was on the street corner, he would say hello and he would ask if he could help them cross the street if they were old or carry their groceries or just be happy, just smile. And he said, it was remarkable what it did for me. And he said, all I was doing was living the gospel. And he had a couple baptisms, but it was not like you go to Russia and baptize a lot of people. And he just said it was the only thing I could do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is the only invitation is just by living.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much of these are just interconnected. I mean, by living the gospel, by caring for those, I mean, you are inviting other people, whether it's in a short time frame and a long time frame in this life and the next life. That's all we can do. It's simple, but yeah. Thank you. Okay, the last one is uniting families for eternity. And in the handbook, it says, make covenants as we receive our own temple ordinances, discovering our deceased ancestors and performing ordinances for them in the temple so they can make covenants with God. And then going to the temple regularly where possible to worship God and perform ordinances for his children. And the story Elder Stevenson shared was a woman named Lydia from Ukraine. And she learned about the temple from the missionaries and wanted to attend the temple. And after her baptism, she began preparing to receive her own temple recommend. And once she received her endowment, she spent several days going to the temple to do proxy work. And she loved the temple. And then she and her husband were sealed there and called as temple missionaries. And together they have found more than 15,000 names of ancestors who have worked to provide the temple ordinances for them. And she just ends with, it says, when asked about her feelings regarding temple work, Lydia says, what did I receive in the temple? I have made new covenants with God. My testimony has been strengthened. I have learned to receive personal revelation, and I'm able to perform saving ordinances for my deceased ancestors, and I can love and serve other people. And and I think with that, I get overwhelmed. Like, I come from a long line of members of the church, and so I'm like, temple work, like, it's all been done. Like, and it kind of has, and I'm grateful that I have had relatives who have like really gone forth, and I have books and binders of all this genealogy, and which I'm so grateful for. But sometimes I think about, like, how can I, help with people who have moved on? And I think too, even just like talking to our children and things about grandparents and our family and where they come from, and just like keeping it as just part of like a knowledge that they're just familiar with, and even the sacrifices they made to join the church and come here, and just like talking about those stories so that it's like, and my children have heard a few times where it's just like, I can't do this, it's too hard. It's like, oh, you don't know where you come from then. Let me tell you, we do really hard things here. You can't, and so, and going to the temple, and even if you're, when you're doing work for a name you don't know who this person is, I mean, that's just as important. Would anyone like to add anything? Or Yeah.
I just had the thought that I think when we see the Uniting Families for Eternity, we do think about past generations and doing that genealogy work and the work for the dead as well. We should think that way. But I also just had the thought about, but there's also that forward focus where helping our children understand the importance of receiving endowments of their own and continuing the generations of members of the church who have made those sacred covenants with the Lord. And so I think we can do that work within our own families, with our kids too, and not to kind of lose sight of that important, right? That's all part of it. And, or for other family members, you know, like I have siblings who haven't been through the temple, and being there to encourage them and answer questions and things like that, you know, helping them on their path. That's all part of it too.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, thank you everyone for sharing. I think he says that much can be learned from the miraculous outcomes brought through the simple application of simple gospel principles. And all they did is within our grasp as well. And he says, may we keep the gospel simple as we take upon us our divinely appointed responsibilities to live the gospel of Jesus Christ, to care for those in need, to invite all to receive the gospel, and to unite families for eternity. And he says, doing so will surely bring peace and joy. And I definitely have a testimony of that. It does bring us peace and joy. It brings us contentment. And it's going to look different for everybody, just like it looked different for everybody in these stories he shared. But they're just ordinary people fulfilling their divinely appointed responsibilities just in a simple way. And I think if we just focus on being consistent with that and doing what we can within our worlds and our that we will we could have miraculous outcomes that we may never even realize happen, but Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ definitely will. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't ask you to say the closing prayer. We have somebody who's wanting to pray for us. Thanks, Sarah.
Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this beautiful spring day, for the lovely warm weather. We're grateful to be gathered together, everyone family. And we're grateful for Christine and for her efforts and preparation and for the message she shared. We ask that God bless us to be in tune to thy spirit as we listen promptings to the needs of those around us, that we may be able to keep in perspective the things we learned today, and that each of us have something to offer and something to share that could be meaningful to someone else. And we thank the Heavenly Father for many blessings and for the opportunity we have to be part of the gospel in this day. In Jesus Christ. Amen.
Yeah, you love it.